alternate titles. I haven't decided which. One is sort of a pun or a portmanteau word. And the other title is Chaos, Eros, Earth, and Old Night, which is a reference to Hesiod's, the ancient Greek poet Hesiod, who said that the first four deities to appear out of the primordial nothingness were Chaos, Eros, or Cupid, love, desire, Earth, Gaia, and Old Night. And the subtitle of the paper is Radical Neo-Hermeticism and Ecological Resistance. What I'm trying to do here is bring together all of the themes of the earlier lectures and bring it all up to date and answer some of the questions about values as to what I think the value of Hermeticism is, especially in modern America, and to present actually a polemical position. I'm going to take a strong pro-Hermetic position here, but I think you'll see from what I have to say that I still maintain this dialectical interpretation. It isn't just a matter of, as I said it from the beginning, it isn't just a matter of Hermeticists good, Puritans evil. It's not a Manichaean division of society that I'm trying to make here. Nevertheless, I do feel that Hermeticism has something to offer the modern world, and that's what this paper is about. I begin with a quote from the English Renaissance Hermeticist Robert Flood, who said, "Think that in the first place thou wert clay or dust or earth or ashes, and then that Demogorgon, god of the earth and universe, burnished all over with sacred and eternal fire, drawing the dim curtains or dark tapestry of his high illuminated palace, attended by eternity and chaos, his two obedient and loyal vassals before the beginning, did vouchsafe with loud majesty to respect and look on from above thy senseless mold, and for thy sake did command chaos to discharge by abortion her troubled womb of litigium, that after her purification she might conceive and bring forth a second fruit of a more worthy condition, that is to say, Pan, the god Pan, P-A-N, or universal nature." In the note on the word litigium, which is a word I love, it's a name of a deity representing something much worse than chaos, and from which we get the modern word litigation or legal. You could think of it as a sort of demon of lawyers or something. So what Flood is just saying here is that the God of the earth and the universe, the God of the material principle of the world, calls on chaos to basically to bring the world into being, to bring you as an individual into being, and that you stand for universal nature. Pan is the God that stands for us as individuals who are part of universal nature.
Sorry, you said Demogorgon?
Yeah, D-E-M-O-G-O-R-G-O-N.
Do I understand a gorgon as being part snake, part bird?
Well, very likely. I'm not exactly sure. I'm not sure where Flood came up with this idea of Demogorgon as the primordial creator of the world. It's perhaps had something to do with the Egyptian Gnostic symbolism. Anyway, part one of my essay is called Prestidigitation. Friedrich Nietzsche says, that we need an illusion to keep society going in the face of the breakdown threatening it through knowledge. Knowledge of existential vacuity, the displacement of man, the death or silence of God or nature, the terror of a freedom which is not an abstract ideal, but a fate. In other words, Nietzsche, in response to the death of God, says that something must take the place of God. He calls it illusion. If we are to invent a word, and the word invent originally means to find out, if we are to invent such an illusion, then we should arrive at one which works, which is effective. And this should be possible on the assumption that effective action does not necessarily depend on truth. Truth in quotation marks. Since truth does not truly exist in any literal, metaphysical, or philosophical sense. Whereas effective action can be said to exist in some perspectivalist or situational meaning of the term. Here I'm taking Nietzsche's point of view and saying that there is no absolute truth, but that action in the world does have some kind of existence. Skimming the Will to Power, which was Nietzsche's last great unfinished work, one can find many different approaches to this cluster of concepts. A few hours with the index turned up these quotations from Nietzsche. No matter how strongly a thing may be believed, strength of belief is no criterion of truth. But what is truth? Perhaps a kind of belief that has become a condition of life? The criterion of truth resides in the enhancement of the feeling of power. That a great deal of belief must be present. That is the precondition of every living thing and its life. Therefore, what is needed is that something must be held to be true, not that something is true. Truth is the kind of error without which a certain species of life could not live. The value for life is ultimately decisive. My Dionysus ideal, as you know, Nietzsche was obsessed with the god Dionysus. In fact, when he went mad in the streets of Turin and started writing very strange letters to all his old friends, he signed some of them Dionysus. He says here, my Dionysus ideal, the perspective of all organic functions, all the strongest instincts of life, the force in all life that wills error. The new courage, no a priori truths, but a free subordination to a ruling idea that has its time. Now, all these quotes may sound, the more often I read them aloud, the more Machiavellian they sound to me. What Nietzsche seems to be saying is that something has to hold life together, and it doesn't much matter what it is as long as people believe in it. But in fact, of course, by taking these lines from Nietzsche out of context, I've left you with so actually something that always happens when you take lines from Nietzsche out of context. He ends up looking like some immoral Superman, which is not at all fair to Nietzsche. Nietzsche believed that this illusion that he spoke of should come from art, from love, from beauty, from the free spirit. He believed in very high ideals. He just wasn't deluded enough to think that these high ideals had some kind of absolute metaphysical being. So, in sharing this perspective, I'm not about to propose that we just that we blithely and immorally choose an idea and propagate it on the public just in order to keep the world from falling apart, as if that were a value. What I am proposing is that we take Nietzsche's courageous, daring position of doing away with all validation from outside, doing away with all outworn concepts of gods that speak to you out of the clouds and tell you, don't do that, We're free to do. The question is, what do we do? How do we overcome our petty, stupid, boring selves to really do something good and interesting, solid, imaginative, beautiful? That, I think, is where Nietzsche's great value lies, and that's the way I'm trying to use him here. And I'm going to now repeat some of this again, but I guess a little repetition doesn't hurt. The will to power is in large part concerned with the question of action, which is what makes it so much more valuable to us now than many of Nietzsche's finished projects, like Thus Spake Zarathustra, for example. We don't need his precise experiments or even his basic axioms so much as we need his methodology. The sections in Will to Power on art and love seem particularly powerful discussions or attempts on the possible utility of certain illusions. And by utility, I don't mean utilitarian use, but imaginal use. The use to your imagination. Imagination, if you like, with a capital I, not just idle fancies, although these can be very important and deeply transforming. Reverie, is not, I'm not sneering at reverie, but I'm elevating imagination along with reverie and daydream into a principle here. Let's call these illusions myths, all right, in order to escape the usual connotation of futility connected with the word illusion. Nietzsche used the word illusion because he didn't want to beat around the bush, but let's beat around the bush a little and call it myth, all right? To take Nietzsche at his word is to envision a society of free spirits devoted to art and love and the transformation of the social, simply because they, in the excess and superabundance of life in them, find such play to be a challenging and joyful action. Now, interesting as we may find such an image, Nietzsche's method for arriving at it holds more interest for us now than the image itself. In searching for an image which could bring action into being, so to speak, Nietzsche went back beyond the Enlightenment to natural philosophy, or, not to beat around the bush, to natural magic, as propounded by that Renaissance he admired so much, even more than the 18th century skepticism of the rationalists. In natural magic, as Ioan Culianu pointed out. Remember, I talked to you about Culianu in the first lecture. He was the disciple of Mircea Eliade, who was assassinated by the Romanian secret police a couple of years ago in the middle of his life's work, which was basically to carry on Eliade's great work into the study of symbolism and the history of religion. And he has a book called Eros and Magic in the Renaissance, which I very highly recommend. Culianu, Couliano. Yes, he was assassinated by the remnants of Romanian secret police after 1989, because he had pointed out that the so-called Romanian Revolution of '89 was not a revolution at all. It was just a recycling of the same party hacks and assassins with some old fascists added in for flavor. And for this, they killed him. In America, in a men's room in the Department of Religious Studies at the University of Chicago. I suppose so. I don't know. I heard about it from Andrei Codrescu, who's also Romanian, and went for that the whole of that year. It was also going in fear for his life and receiving threatening phone calls. So anyway, sort of adds a little spice to my thesis to have had Culianu iced in this mysterious way, I suppose. Although I really, it's a great loss to the world of scholarship. Anyway, in natural magic, as Culianu points out, we find a program for deploying the imaginal process to bring about individual and social transformation, a program which can only be seen as the direct precursor of modern psychosociology and all attempts at providing a social myth in the Sorelian sense of the term. In other words, natural magic, aside from its experimental uses for the individual, also has a social basis involving the manipulation of images in order to change archetypal consciousness in large numbers of people. In fact, on the mass level. And this is why I bring in a reference to the a very peculiar thinker, Georges Sorel, S-O-R-E-L, who wrote well-known book called Reflections on Violence, in which he suggested that the way to bring about the revolution was to propagate a myth of working class power, and that myth of working class power would be expressed in the general strike, and that to work towards the general strike and the subsequent collapse of capitalist society was to work, in Sorel's terms, in the area of myth, of the manipulation of mythological images. And so Sorel has come to be either praised or blamed, depending on your point of view, and he's had followers on both the left and the right, for the introduction of mythic imagery into the political struggle. And you could say that the fascists attempted to do this with their mythical images of Nordic purity and so forth and so on, but it's clear that the left also did this with the myth of the general strike, the myth of the golden age when all men were equal, and so forth and so on. I think basically all politics is carried on through the manipulation of mythic images, and it was Sorel's brilliance to see that. And the reason why he isn't better known and the reason why he's usually denounced is because he gave the game away. Politicians don't like the game to be given away so bluntly and so brutally as he did. Postmodern critical theory has largely ignored the utopian aspects of Nietzsche's thought in Will to Power. For various reasons, a lot of people have followed up on many of Nietzsche's projects, including, as I said, an extension of Nietzsche's nihilistic epistemology to suicidal extremes, as if his own insanity were not sufficient warning. But to put everything in doubt, as Charles Fourier showed, and that was one of Fourier's favorite expressions, to put everything in doubt, does not imply the impossibility of utopian speculation or even action. And I would refer you to the great German Jewish thinker Walter Benjamin on this point in particular. His books, Illuminations and Reflections, are in print, and I recommend them very, very strongly on this and many other interesting points. Just as there are religious Nietzscheans, as in the famous Death of God school of theology, there exist also utopian Nietzscheans. The following proposal arises from methodology derived from Will to Power in the light of recent reading on Renaissance and later history of Hermeticism or natural magic. And here I think I might just mention a few book titles for those of you who are interested. Should be looking at my notes here anyway. Actually, if anyone is interested in further reading for this course, I have a bibliography here, and I'd be glad to discuss it with you after. But I think I will at this point, should carry on. I thought I had just a few titles picked out here, but in fact it's about 20 titles, and I don't want to stop now and go over all that. So where was I? Boom. Okay. So, all right, just to summarize part one here then, what I'm doing is projecting Nietzsche onto Renaissance Hermeticism in order to see whether we can come up with a modern myth that will be of some use, to us for some project which I will now, or which I will reveal, so to speak. Part two, the reality wars. If we're searching for a myth which might be effective, we should perhaps hesitate to ransack an epistemological system like natural magic, which has been so thoroughly debunked and abandoned by modern science and philosophy. And in fact, we should certainly exercise extreme caution in dealing with both the supernaturalist and the ideological claims of Renaissance magic, lest our project decay at once into some form of romantic reaction or New Age fantasy. What interests us is not the hoodoo aspects of magic, charming though they may be, but rather the dialectical role played by Hermeticism in the complex struggle for paradigm hegemony in 17th century science. In other words, I'm not interested now in whether the individual experiments propounded by a Flood or a Pico Mirandola or Giordano Bruno worked or not. That doesn't interest me right now. What I'm interested in primarily now is the battle for hegemony, for control of the emerging paradigm of modern science. So we go back to the 17th century, and we see that the players in this game included, 1, the Baconians, or proponents of experimentalism; 2, the Cartesians, followers of René Descartes; the so-called mechanic or mechanical philosophers; 3, the Newtonians, followers of Newton; and 4, the Hermeticists. These were the players. Classical modern science, the winning paradigm, which ruled human thought up until Einstein's publication in, I believe, 1915 of the theory of relativity. A very successful paradigm indeed, turned out to include elements from the first 3 systems, but almost nothing from the 4th. From Bacon, it took the efficacy of experimentation, experimentalism. From the Cartesians, it took the image of the world and of nature as dead matter. Cogito ergo sum leaves the world out of it. You know, you've got I think, therefore I am. What happened to this? You know, what happened to this stuff? No, it's nowhere. It's nothing. It's dead. You know. From Newton, Newton, it took the basic structure of classical physics. Newton was the real winner, with its imagery of force, energy, gravity, dimensional space, and lineal time. All those metaphors which so influenced and facilitated the emerging ideology of capitalism. This is not an original thought. It's been noticed by historians of science over and over again that the whole Newtonian vocabulary expresses an attitude towards reality which facilitated the rise of capitalism from medieval predecessors. That's a whole separate subject. I don't want to get into it right now. It's very interesting though. But from Hermeticism, science inherited, according to its own official history of itself, nothing except a few odd and accidental discoveries in chemistry, but no basic ideas, no major tropes. If you read histories of science, you'll usually find about that much devoted to Hermeticism, and they'll say a few of these misguided alchemists mistakenly stumbled on, I don't know, nitric acid or something, and this was the great contribution of Hermeticism to modern science. That's it. Of course, this legend is simply not true. Newton, for one, smuggled a very central Hermetic concept into his system, that of action at a distance, to explain gravity. He even used the Hermetic erotic term for it, attraction. And we take this for granted. We think that Newton pulled these rabbits out of his hat. Such is not the case. This concept was stolen, basically, from Hermeticism. But Newton never published his secret alchemical treatises. They only appeared in the 1950s in print. And for political reasons, he disguised his debt to Hermetic science, thus perpetrating that decisive betrayal so incisively condemned by William Blake, who blamed Newton for everything, and in a sense was right. In fact, Hermeticism in politics, and here we come to the crux of the reason why Hermeticism lost the battle. Hermeticism in politics stood for radicalism and revolution, not for medieval reaction or musty superstition or the sort of things that it's accused of in modern textbooks. As we've found, as we've discussed in earlier lectures here, Rosicrucianism and early Masonry can best be understood as radical Protestant political movements. And most of the extremist sects of the interregnum of the English Revolutionary period were heavily influenced by the Hermetic worldview. The Family of Love, I think I may have mentioned them before. They were a sect of Protestant extremists who eventually practiced nudism and free love, and or at least were accused of it. And they are a very fascinating link between the mysticism of a Jakob Böhme and the Renaissance occultists on the one hand, and Anabaptist revolutionary politics on the other. The Anabaptists being the extreme radical Protestants who were betrayed and condemned even by Luther, who personally was responsible for the massacre of thousands of Anabaptists, maybe tens of thousands, in 1525 in Germany, and really put the kibosh on true radical Protestantism forever at that point. The Family of Love was a sect that began in the 15th century and extended all the way up into the 18th century in America. So it provides a link along the way, and people learned, other sectarians learned from the Family of Love. Protestantism, if you were an educated Protestant and politically radical, the chances are very good that you were also a Hermeticist. These things went together. Blake, in this sense, was the last serious Hermetic radical. Blake was a mystic, he was a Hermeticist, he knew Renaissance Hermeticism and Neoplatonism, and of course he was also a raving revolutionary, friend of Thomas Paine, took part in the riots that overthrew the prison in London. What was the name of it? It was sort of the equivalent of the Bastille Day in England, although it didn't lead to revolution. Huh? Did somebody have a name for that prison? Sorry. Was it Newgate? I don't remember. Anyway, not important. But Newton and his allies opted for real power, not mumbo-jumbo. They formed the Royal Society and turned their backs on the embarrassing enthusiasts and Kabbalist conspirators of the Hermetic left. In doing so, they succeeded in lifting the Hermetic concept of attraction while utterly rejecting the Hermetic idea which had always seemed to accompany and even explain the mystery of action at a distance, the idea of the animate world, the living world. Action at a distance without the idea of a living world is very, very hard to understand. And nobody understands gravity now, and don't let anybody kid you. Gravity is a total mystery in modern physics. Still, even the relativists and the quantum mechanics can't explain gravity. Nobody can explain gravity. Newton just said, "Oh well, it's action at a distance." You know, everybody, "Oh, interesting." You know, and because his theorems worked, and because you could build steam engines on the basis of it, everyone thought, "Well, yeah, sure, action at a distance." But it's a truly bizarre idea. What do you mean, action at a distance? You know. All right, according to Hermetic philosophy or natural magic, the world is alive, and thus, like any living individual, can be said to have spiritual faculties, such as intellect and imagination. Imagination is therefore not simply the impotent fantasy of an ego locked inside a skull, a cogito ergo sum, and able to influence the world only as a ghost in the machine. No, the Hermetic imagination is a force capable of acting at a distance through the pneumatic or subtle will substance of attraction focused through images. All right, this is more mumbo-jumbo, but at least we're getting, at least we're focusing in on something here. This can be done because everything, quote-unquote, is alive and to some degree conscious. The world does this. Life attracts life. And the individual consciousness can likewise accomplish this, of course on a necessarily microcosmic level, through the practice of natural magic. Newton's brilliant move was to accept the universe's action at a distance, gravity's attraction, while denying that it could be considered, that the world could be considered in any way conscious or animate, or that it could possess a prolongation in the world as topocosm, or in human consciousness as microcosm. This word topocosm, I'm very fond of it these days. It means place, as a specific place as a reflection of the cosmos. So if you build your garden in the shape of a mandala or something, it would become your topocosm. So I've said that universal, the living quality of the world. The world's livingness possesses a prolongation in the world as topocosm, in the world as a reflection of the total metaphysical reality. And in human consciousness, which is the microcosmic version of that. So for Newton, the world was indeed a clock, even if some of the springs were invisible or purely mathematical. And at this point we can see that it's no wonder that some of the Cartesians accused Newton of thinking like a wizard. I mean, he didn't totally get away with this. He was accused of, the Cartesians in particular, were very keenly aware of Newton's sleight of hand trick here, and they criticized him for it, but in the end, he got away with it. Some science fiction writer should speculate about what modern science would have become if Hermeticism had won the paradigm battle of the 17th century. Perhaps such strange aspects of physics as the wave-particle theory of matter, or uncertainty, or Bell's theorem, or chaos, would have been discovered much earlier. Are these terms going over everybody's head? Does everybody know what I'm talking about? Yeah. Certainly we would have an advanced technology, for the natural magicians were no technophobes or Luddites. But it would be a technology based on the perception of the world as animate rather than dead. Thus, our science fiction writer is free to imagine an appropriate, biologically oriented, non-invasive technology, green, doubtlessly erotic, strong on life enhancement, consciousness studies, and ecology, weak on Promethean, anti-human, wasteful, destructive designs. A pleasant fantasy. But the absurd purpose of this essay, yes, the purpose of this essay is to ask whether it is perhaps not yet too late for such a technology to come in. Hair of the dog. This begins with another quote, which I think is from Flood, although I've lost my reference here, but it sounds like Flood. When our spirit has been carefully prepared and purged by natural things, it is able to receive many gifts through stellar rays from the spirit of cosmic life. Cosmic life is visibly propagated in grasses and trees, which are like the hair of the body of earth. It is also revealed in stones and metals, which are like the teeth and bones of this body. It circulates in the living shells of the earth, which adhere to stones. By making frequent use of plants and other living beings, it is possible to gain a great deal from the spirit of the world. And another little quote from Novalis, the German early 19th century mystic. If the world is a tree, then we are the blossoms. The proposal to revive the Hermetic myth of the living earth as an effective means toward the radical transformation of scientific, technological, and indeed social paradigms. To counter utilitarianism, progressism, capitalism, and other destructive ideologies based on classical modern science, without thereby foregoing the benefits of the useful, enhansive, or wealth-increasing aspects of science, which we can loosely define as knowledge of the material world. So let me just, this is a key sentence, so let me read it again. The proposal to revive the Hermetic myth of the living earth as an effective means toward the radical transformation of scientific, technological, and social paradigms, without foregoing the benefits of the useful, enhansive, or wealth-increasing benefits of science. In order to accomplish this, we need to be able to show certain things. Three things. One, that the worldview of natural magic is not simply a delusion, and that it is open to rectification through the application of philosophical critical theory. In other words, that it isn't just mumbo-jumbo, but that by bringing all the knowledge and theory that have happened since the 17th century to bear, to look back on this problem and to start over again with this problem, that we can rectify certain errors which were made by the Hermeticists and bring the thing up to date. Two, that this critique could result in a new paradigm capable of offering a coherent analysis of scientific facts, so-called. And three, that this paradigm could prove effective both as science and as myth in a transformation of culture. And I didn't use the word culture in the text. I used the phrase second nature. People say, I think it was originally a Marxist. It might have been Marx himself who said that culture is our nature. I don't know who said that. When I talked about the disappearance of the frontier and the disappearance of wilderness, I was touching on this point, that we live in culture as Paleolithic Homo sap lived in nature, in the wilderness. And in fact, if you don't believe me, think about New York. New York is a trackless jungle in which it is completely possible to lose oneself and never be found again. If you're looking for wilderness, it's right out there, basically. In short, that the myth of the living world could be both necessary and sufficient for the furtherance of a radical social project of liberatory action in the vital interface between technology and life, between culture sphere and biosphere. So now we go back on these 3 points again. First, that the worldview of natural magic is not simply delusive and that it is open to rectification. Philosophy, theory, since Nietzsche, has more or less dissolved the 19th century borders of rationality. Reason is no universal category, but it can be defined only in the context of a given consensus. We still have borders, of course, such as that between the shrinking daylight world of the classical high scientific worldview and the encroaching shadow of coincidence, shamanic consciousness, pataphysics, the archaic wilderness, whatever you pronounce that word, wildness, wilderness. There's no need to redefine the world of shadow in terms of the world of daylight, or vice versa, although the stranger facts of quantum and chaos do sometimes seem to violate the border, smuggling something chthonic through the customs of rationality. In fact, there is no need or justification to consider either world real in some exclusive sense or unreal in some exclusive sense. One can keep a foot in both these worlds at once on the level of experience and thus be called one who straddles the fence, which in some cultures is a term for witches or shamans. Culiano shows that Hermeticism was just as rational as the mechanic philosophy in terms of the consensus of the 17th century, maybe more so, and just as rational as is modern science in terms of the 20th century consensus. We're brought up to believe that there's something absolute about science, that philosophy and religion may be, they're fuzzy, they're subject to argument, but science is real, science is hard, science has edges, science is, true. You can depend on science. Well, I think that not just Culiano, but a whole slew of modern philosophers of and historians of science have completely torn this idea to shreds. What we believe to be scientific truth very much depends on the world consensus, the way we look at the world as a society. And the peculiar success of modern science is precisely in propagating this myth of its trueness in terms of a consensus which almost everybody subscribes to, and which admits that there could be such a thing as a real, solid, hard, true fact. And if you are into studying quantum and chaos, the most up-to-date, thin edge of the wedge of modern science, you're going to find that these people are far more fuzzy and confused in their thinking than a lot of the mystics who hang around this place. Bell himself says he doesn't know what the hell it means, that a particle could be in two places at the same time, or that one particle could be in telepathic communication with another particle. This guy's a scientist, and he doesn't know what he's talking about, and he admits it. That's the nice thing about Bell. Bohm is the same, He admits he doesn't know what he's talking about. This is just as mystical as anything in 17th century Hermeticism. In fact, much more so in a lot of ways. So if you've kept up with modern science, you should have no trouble at all following, at least as a mental exercise, what I'm doing here, because you will have already long since given up the idea that an atom is like this thing and it has little planets going around it. I mean, it's a useful diagram to explain certain things in chemistry, but it just doesn't hold water. I mean, literally, it doesn't. It just doesn't hold up. So anyway. So what Culiano says, and I agree with him absolutely, is that in terms of the consensus worldview of the 17th century, Hermeticism had just as good a chance at winning out as Cartesianism or Newtonianism. It was for political reasons that it didn't win, basically. And we've discussed those political reasons. They had to do with revolution versus counter-revolution. Now, this does not mean that Hermetic science is as valid, useful, or correct as modern science in operational terms. It isn't. At least I don't think so. I don't really think that alchemy works as well as a steam engine. I think that alchemy is much more important than just an accidental way of discovering nitric acid, but I don't think that it, works, click, lead into gold, click. That's not the kind of science it is. But the modern consensus paradigm has been shifted, especially by quantum and chaos, in a direction which makes the philosophy of Hermeticism look interesting again. It might even be said, even if half in jest, that natural magic provides more useful images for thinking about, say, Bell's theorem, than does classical Newtonian physics. If natural magic is to be rectified in such a way as to resuscitate its usefulness, we should no doubt begin by ignoring the unprovable or disproved aspects of Hermetic science, alchemy, astrology, etc. Although, as I say in a note here, this is not meant to discourage research in such promising areas as traditional medicine, plant wisdom, shamanic therapeutics, consciousness studies, or even certain aspects of alchemy. On the contrary, if Hermetic science is to be in some sense revived, it must deploy itself especially in those areas where it does indeed offer hard solutions, not only in order to benefit humanity, but also to make propaganda for its new and rectified worldview. In other words, if you can't change lead into gold, but it could well be that, for example, the proponents of modern proponents of herbal medicine, who are going back to the 17th century for a lot of their inspiration, have really hit on some working, things that really do work. That's my personal experience, and it's also my belief. So those are the areas in which your modern Hermeticist should concentrate. Areas of Hermetic science where actual hard results are available, because that's what's going to make propaganda for the cause. And also, it'll be good for humanity, right? And concentrate instead on certain basic images, and among these, the central image, that of the living earth. Now, going back to point 2, which was that the critique should result in a new paradigm capable of offering a coherent analysis of scientific facts. Natural magic is precisely a magic that rejects the escape clause of the supernatural as a means whereby to explain or explain away its irreducible sense of amazement about the world. And I have a nice quote from Pico della Mirandola on the subject of amazement. I'll throw it in. For Pico, the true magus, the true magician, abounding in the loftiest mysteries, embraces the deepest contemplation of the most secret things, and at last the knowledge of all nature. The magus, in calling forth into the light, as if from their hiding places, the powers scattered and sown in the world by the loving kindness of God, does not so much work wonders as diligently serve a wonder-working nature. The magus, having more searchingly examined into the harmony of the universe, which the Greeks with greater significance call sympatheia, and having clearly perceived the reciprocal affinity of natures, and applying to each single thing the suitable and peculiar inducements, brings forth into the open the miracles concealed in the recesses of the world, in the depths of nature, and in the storehouses and mysteries of God, just as if she herself were their maker. So, I mean, your good scientists in whatever field have always had this sense of the marvelous, but I think that the Hermeticists made a special thing of it. It was, in effect, the essence of their science, instead of just an accident, as it is for most classical scientists. I mean, an accident, a secondary thing. Bacon and Newton presumably felt this astonishment, but managed to suppress it. The Cartesians abolished it altogether, and today's disenchanted power-parasitic scientists are their lineal descendants. But relativity, quantum, and chaos have revived amazement. In fact, it may be impossible to do any truly elegant science in these fields without such a sense. And the same could be said of brain-mind research, morphogenic field research, psychedelic studies, or other inherently strange disciplines. The Hermetic science of the Renaissance did indeed depend on certain teleological axioms. Teleology means that things have a purpose, and that teleology is the study of what that purpose that comes from outside of things is. So religion is teleological, atheism is anti-teleological. So the Hermetic science of the Renaissance did indeed depend on certain teleological axioms. And it is precisely the avoidance of teleology which has been taken since the 17th century to characterize all real science, so-called. Certainly, if our myth is to satisfy the uneasy shade of Nietzsche, it cannot make use of any such loopholes, whether crudely supernaturalist or subtly teleological. If we're proposing a neo-Hermetic paradigm, we must find a mode of transition to this new worldview which does not violate the essential demands of the older worldview for coherence and falsification. Rectified natural magic must not indulge in any special pleading nor make any appeals to irrationalism, to romantic reaction or nostalgism, nor to a cynical relativism which would deny the value of all testing or thinking. In other words, if we're going to revive Hermeticism, we have to play the paradigm game, as outlined by Thomas Kuhn in his great book, Structure of Scientific Revolutions. Thank you. Kuhn. The book's in print. Highly recommended. And in other words, we have to, if we're going to be neo-Hermetic scientists and we're going to compete with the dwindling forces of classical modern science, then we have to do it by, to a certain extent, playing their game on their ground rules. Of course, there's also the area where we don't play the game on their ground rules, where we cheat. But at least in public, in terms of the public discourse, we play the game of falsification. We look for experiments that quote-unquote work, that click work. You know what I mean? And exactly here, the work of certain contemporary scientists takes on a new luster, especially Ilya Prigogin's investigations of creative evolution. Prigogine, Order Out of Chaos. How many people read it? Oh dear. Very important book. Very, very major book. Should be read by everybody. Prigogine basically uses chaos science to avoid both the random mutation neo-Darwinian school of evolution on the one hand, if you have enough cosmic soup and it sits around and bubbles for a long enough time, suddenly you get Homo sapiens, this which completely violates information theory and just simply does not work as science. I mean, it really sucks as science. On the one hand, on the other hand, all the vitalist and teleological explanations of life, that you need a god or you need, spores from planet X or whatever. So Prigogin's brilliant undertaking is to explain the origin of life and evolution according to chaos science, and I won't get into the details of how he does this, but it avoids both of these idiotic pitfalls. And as far as I'm concerned, it's the first intelligent theory of evolution I've ever come across. Yeah. Ilya, Ilya, is his first name. He's, yeah, yes, yeah.
It's in print.
Is he a scientist?
Oh, yes, he's a Nobel-winning scientist. Yeah. Right. This is why he's so important. He's not. I like Rupert Sheldrake a lot, but Prigogine has got the chops, And I would, in the same category, I would put the Gaia scientists such as James Lovelock and Lynn Margulis. These people are also real scientists. Complex dynamical systems are not required to show foresight or altruism in order to be considered as living in some operational sense of the term. This is a statement which I think Prigogine and Lovelock and Margulis would all agree on. Complex dynamical systems, such as life, are not required to show foresight or altruism in order to be considered as living in some operational sense of the term. A defense of this assertion is beyond the scope of this essay, not to mention my own poor capabilities, nor can these scientists simply be appropriated to the cause of neo-Hermeticism. Nevertheless, I would argue that the tensions between the mechanical axioms of classical physics, which still prevail in public discourse, and the strange discoveries of a Prigogine or a Lovelock, which are just now beginning to emerge into that discourse, have created that this dissonance, this cognitive dissonance, has created an area of propitious uncertainty, which can to some extent be seized by us radical neo-Hermeticists. In other words, rectified natural magic can be seen as compatible with the axioms and procedures of a science which will develop, and is already developing, in the area of illumination provided by quantum weirdness, the links between morphogenics and chaos, cognitive studies, the bio-geostructuralism of the Gaians, etc., etc. This newly emerging paradigm also takes in social sciences. And here I would mention the anthropology of Marshall Salins and Pierre Clastres, or the history philosophy of science propounded by Feyerabend and Paul Feyerabend, Against Method. Am I right? Is that the name of his book? Or is that Clastres? Yeah, Against Method by Feyerabend. Brilliant book. Calls himself a Dada epistemologist. But he is also, again, a very, very solid academic historian of science with all the chops and degrees that you need to get taken seriously. And when he says that the history of science is basically an exercise in Dada, then he has to be taken seriously, and he is taken seriously. Yes, soft sciences, social sciences, soft sciences such as ethnopharmacology, ecology, ethology, animal behavior, and even weather prediction. In short, our brand of Hermeticism is indeed equipped to become a paradigm in the full Kuhnian sense of the word, or at least such will be our claim. Point 3, that this paradigm could prove effective both as science and as myth in a transformation of culture. Point 3, but is it the paradigm that we want? We know that classical science has been used to justify industrialization, capitalism, ravaging of environment, mega-war, behaviorism, etc. And we know that we no longer want these things, or at least I don't. But is there any reason to believe that a paradigmatic shift to a worldview characterized by the image of the living earth will help us to overcome the social, cultural, technological, second nature aspects of the old and already dying world of Bacon, Descartes, and Newton? Moreover, is there any reason to expect that the living earth will encourage appropriate technology, or in economics neither capitalist nor communist but human, such as the late E.F. Schumacher once proposed, or respect for the wilderness wilderness, or peace, or a psychology of enhancement rather than control? Will the living earth return to us bearing the dusty reactionary luggage of Renaissance mumbo-jumbo, or a social order based on new forms of oppression, such as ecotopian fascism, or a mind science rooted in magical brainwashing rather than liberation? In fact, can the living earth or the animate universe be considered in any way an inherently radical solution? We have already noted that Hermeticism influenced many of the most radical antinomian and neo-pagan movements of the 15th through the 17th centuries. As natural magic steadily lost ground through the 18th century to the mechanical and Newtonian sciences, it retreated underground into that alternate universe of heresy and rebellion, that subterranean stream which has never ceased to flow beneath our world, from the very moment Neolithic culture forced Paleolithic culture to disappear, up to the present moment. To a certain extent, Hermeticism became the scientific paradigm of this underworld, even as it failed so ignominiously to conquer or even to influence the daylight world of power above. Robert Darnton, in his wonderful study of mesmerism, Darnton, also a book that's in print and really a great read. I think it's just called Mesmerism, shows how the Hermetic idea, relegated to the shadowy realm of crank occultists, became wedded to an equally shadowy realm of social heretics, Masonic conspirators, pamphleteers, lumpen intellectuals, and utopian fantasists. Of these, one of the greatest, a traveling salesman from Lyon named Charles Fourier, experienced in 1799 his own vast vision of the animate universe, comparable to that of William Blake for grandeur and complexity. Fourier proclaimed himself far greater than Newton, who had merely discovered the attractive force of gravity, whereas Fourier determined that attraction, erotic attraction, was the animating force of the entire universe. Like Ficino, Pico, Bruno, and Paracelsus, but entirely unaware of their works, Fourier enthroned Eros as the reality principle, and on this basis deduced the necessity for the eradication of civilization and the inevitability of utopia. According to Fourier, not only Earth, but also the solar system and the entire universe are alive, which makes him far more radical than James Lovelock, who thinks that only the Earth is alive, as far as I can make out anyway. Stars and even planets, moreover, connect with each other and with the animate whole by means of aromal rays, which are the vehicle of their copulation. Earth, however, has a problem. It has been literally knocked from its course by the potent disease of civilization, which prevents us poor Terrans from realizing and expressing our own passional attractions. The cosmos is geared, so to speak, to provide an excessive abundance of brilliance, luxury, amorousness, and beauty, where civilization offers only dull morality, scarcity, ugliness, and oppression. Labor itself, which to us is a curse, and it even says so in the Bible, was meant to be attractive, and in the utopian condition of harmony, as Fourier called it, each of us would have at least 30 different vocations in order to fulfill our many desires and appetites for activities which are enjoyable in themselves. Once harmony is achieved, the cosmic illness of Earth would go into remission. So powerful the influence of our human social and sexual bliss that the other planets would feel the force of attraction, since they're alive and conscious, and move closer to Terra. Thus realigned, our solar system would harmonize all its aromal rays. Earth's ray, which is now visible in its diseased state as the aurora borealis, by the way, would once again shoot forth to make love to the stars. Moreover, the Terran ecology would undergo vast changes. The seas would turn to lemonade. All creatures would live in harmony. In fact, certain species such as lions and sharks would turn into their opposites, anti-lions, anti-sharks, now pacific and helpful. All of this would happen, incidentally, not on a Darwinian time scale of eons, but almost instantaneously, once the Earth's human inhabitants converted to Fourierism and arrayed themselves voluntarily and spontaneously into the sexualized phalanxes and series of Harmonian society. this page can scarcely do justice to the grandeur, complexity, and nobility of Fourier's ideas, or their insanity, I might add, which, is what made him so lovable to the Surrealists in particular. And later in December, I'm going to be giving a lecture on Fourier and Surrealism. Not here, in another place, but if you listen to my radio show, I'll let you know about it. Scarcely do justice to the nobility of Fourier's ideas, which inspired the creation of hundreds of Fourierist phalansteries in the mid-19th century. Unfortunately, as I say in the notes, not one of them attained the exact number of inhabitants, 1,620, which Fourier had determined was essential for the full deployment of the various series of passional attraction. If only this condition had been met, we should by now, according to Fourier's calculations, be well on the way to acquiring a fifth moon. And these ideas which seduced, at least for a time, such eminent Victorians as Horace Greeley, J.F. Proudhon, Engels, and Marx, and the founders of Brook Farm. Marx and Engels later turned against Fourier and said somewhere that he stank of the brothel, which should give you some indication of why Marx was so successful and Fourier wasn't, I suppose. I don't know. Brook Farm, the transcendentalist outfit in Massachusetts, which is usually thought of only as a transcendentalist commune, was in fact a Fourierist commune. Anyway, here we must concentrate on Fourier as a Hermeticist, for although he scorned all other systems than his own, and in fact knew almost nothing about the high magic tradition, he was recognized as a true visionary by the Illuminists, Martinists, Mesmerists, and Swedenborgians, and the, Freemasons, and the various other kind of occultists who were around at that time. His theory of analogies, or correspondences, unconsciously repeated that of Paracelsus, and was picked up by Baudelaire and Rimbaud. So if you're familiar with Rimbaud's famous sonnet on the vowels, this is probably directly influenced by Fourier, for example. Fourier had his socialist followers, like Proudhon for a while. Proudhon was, as I like to say, a prude, and also when he found out that Fourier was in favor of universal sexual liberation. By the way, including for women, for lesbians, for homosexuals, for sadists, for everybody. Fourier made no distinctions. He made no moral judgments on this subject, and he was the first modern social reformer to defend homosexuality, which I think alone he deserves a crown for that. Proudhon, the famous anarchist, was influenced by Fourier, came from the same town as Fourier, but drew back from it because of the sexual thing. So Fourier had his socialist followers who tended to downplay and even hide the founder's obsessions with cosmic fate, or with gastrosophy, for example, Harmonian metacuisine, the wisdom of the stomach. This is also one of Fourier's greatest inventions, gastrosophy, the wisdom of eating, the mysticism of food. It's a great concept. Or phalansterian orgiasticism. But he has also had his poetic admirers, including Walter Benjamin, Roland Barthes, and André Breton, who appreciate him precisely for his unique combination of hermetic imagination and sensual delight. Fourier had his... Are you on? Fourier had his socialist followers who tended to downplay and even hide the founder's obsessions with cosmic fate, or with gastrosophy, Harmonian metacuisine, or phalansterian orgiasticism. But he's also had his poetic admirers, including Walter Benjamin, Roland Barthes, and André Breton, who appreciate him precisely for his unique combination of hermetic imagination and sensual delight. Fourier attacked religion on two basic counts. One, it inculcates morality and thus denies passional attraction. And two, it denies divine providence. That is, it denies the natural, excessive, superabundant generosity of material reality, the luxuriousness of Harmonian nature, which is our true birthright. And this idea that the world's economy is basically one of abundance and even superabundance is a line of thought that I see carried from Fourier to Nietzsche, oddly enough, from Nietzsche to Bataille, Georges Bataille, who's written on this very important concept, attacking the whole concept of scarcity. Buckminster Fuller is another person who inherited this idea without, I think, being aware of any of these earlier writers on a purely scientific basis. The idea of scarcity is basically a kind of Neolithic con. It's a trick that was played by the people who invented agriculture, whoever they were, and I have my theories, basically to convince people to give up the free and easy life of original leisure society, as Marshall Sahlins calls it, the life of the hunter-gatherers, who on the average worked 3 or 4 hours a day to feed themselves and spent the rest of the time, I don't know, carving spoons, making love and dancing, and on the one hand, and early primitive agriculturalists who can be shown to work between 14 and 18 hours a day to fill their stomach with many fewer things. The hunter-gatherer, of course, eats everything. The agriculturalist develops food taboos, of course, an artificial ecology which prevents certain foodstuffs from even coming into the economy, so forth and so on. The life of agriculture is the real fall from the Garden of Eden. And the true mystery is how this con was ever played on the human race. And one aspect of this con was the myth of scarcity, that there isn't enough to go around. And it's precisely that myth that Fourier attacked above all others. He said, if this was true, then God would be a son of a bitch, basically. And Fourier believed in God. So it would be absurd to think of God as a bastard. Therefore, there could be no such thing as scarcity. I mean, it's so logical, you know. It really makes perfect sense, at least from a religious point of view. The aliveness of the world implied for Fourier the unconditional valuableness of the human body, its appetites and desires, which, in harmony, would lead inexorably to social bliss. In this, as he loved to boast, he taught the exact opposite of all religion and philosophy, which are based on the superiority of soul or mind over body, on the idea of the imperfection of material reality, and on the condemnation of passional attraction as sin. Without naming it, Fourier thus put his finger on what I call the Gnostic trace in all religion, which is mind-body dualism, and the denigration of corporeal becoming in favor of an eschatology which transcends the flesh. I don't want to go off. I could, give a whole separate lecture on this idea. What I'm saying here basically is that all organized religion retains a mind-body dualism, and that it is, generally speaking, the purpose of all heresy to overcome that dualism, or to deepen it, either to go off on one side of it or off on the other side of it. Monotheists can accept the idea that matter is dead because, for them, matter is sinful, and the wages of sin are death. Descartes, this is something that people forget, Descartes was a pious Christian, and he was applauded by pious Christians for saving the transcendence of the soul, the supreme cogito, from both the mechanics, for whom mind is but an epiphenomenon of matter, on the one hand, and from the natural magicians, for whom mind and body are aspects of each other. In other words, the Cartesians were saying that there is no mind. The magicians were saying that mind and body are the same, and Descartes is the one who saved the cogito, the soul, the existence of the soul, but completely removed it both from the body and from the rest of the material universe. And for this, he was considered to be, at the time, a great Christian philosopher. The idea that matter itself is alive indeed demands of us, if our theology is to be consistent and coherent, a view of the relation between self and world which is utterly opposed to that of all religion and philosophy, at least as Fourier and Nietzsche defined them, except Hermeticism. Hermeticism is the one religion, if you want to call it that, or the one mystical philosophy which could conceivably escape this condemnation. For natural magic, body and mind and world are inextricably interwoven or interimplicated with each other. Thus, the Hermeticist's attitude toward nature is neither passive, since we are precisely participants in the world, nor is it rapacious, dismissive, and destructive in the manner of civilization and classical science. Nature is not fallen, in the view of Hermeticism, and therefore it cannot be considered as a mere source of resources to be exploited or conquered. Human beings, bodily and cognitively, are simultaneously wards and guardians of Gaia, simultaneously caretakers and enjoyers, somewhat in the manner taught by Native American shamans. I had a note on that point. Oh, yeah, and this is something I would just like to throw out here without defending. In my opinion, shamanism cannot be called a religion in the sense that we've been using the word. For the shaman, the other world, or the world of spirits, is not metaphysically alienated from this world. It is experienced materially through possession and trance or through psychedelics. It is not monopolized or alienated through the mediation of a priesthood, and it is entirely immanent rather than transcendent. For this reason, I call shamanism a pre-religious spirituality, not a religious spirituality. And the fact that this kind of spirituality is being brought back to us, and is, on Monday, I suppose everyone was aware that somewhere out there are some Native Americans who are trying to revive this way of thinking in the face of all the hoopla and bullshit about Columbus. And frankly, I think it's one of the most hopeful things that I can think of as having happened in my lifetime. It's actually in my lifetime to witness the rebirth of Native American shamanism and traditional spirituality, because now they're coming back with a consciousness of their way as the way of nature, of the wilderness, which of course before we white folks arrived, they didn't need to have. They didn't need to have a consciousness of the need for the protection of the wilderness. The wilderness was the background and even the foreground of life. There was no need to discuss it in a dialectical way. But as soon as that frontier came to an end, as soon as that wilderness was closed down, as soon as the whole world and every forest in it was mapped, then it became necessary for someone to stand up and say, I take responsibility for protecting at least the memory of the wilderness. And the Native Americans have done this, and I think they're serving a purpose which fits right in with my scheme, and will, if anything is going to save the world, it'll be them. It'll be that attitude, let's say. Fourier, like all the Hermeticists, was fascinated by reports of tribal people still leading pre-Neolithic lives. The European mages recognized in such social structures a pre-echo, as it were, of their own utopian systems. All the romantics, all the radicals, all the revolutionaries were fascinated by Captain Cook's account of Tahiti and the stories about Hawaii and so forth, which Marshall Sahlins, again, great anthropologist, has said that if the European world can be divided, as Nietzsche suggested, into Apollonian and Dionysian societies, then there should be a third term, Aphrodisian societies, to describe Tahiti and Hawaii. They, that is to say, the utopians, intuited an analogy between the shamanism of those societies and their own neo-pagan spirituality. Even Nietzsche, who is in this sense a neo-pagan, replaced the dead god of monotheism with revived Greek and Oriental deities in order to symbolize his sense of the primacy of life over fleshless abstraction. Nietzsche actually developed a myth or illusion in which he could believe and which he hoped would change society, the myth of the eternal return. Perhaps he would have had more success with a myth of the living earth, since it implies such a powerful and Nietzschean yay to life. Nietzsche's myth of the eternal return, that everything repeats itself, is usually thought to be a very pessimistic realization. In fact, for him, it was a powerful source of the strength to overcome fate, because if you have what he called amor fati, a love of your fate, if you totally accept your fate and say, yes, let it all happen again, that this is the ultimate yes that you can say to life, that yes, you're willing to see it happen all over again. You don't want nirvana. You don't want the winding down. You don't want to get off the wheel. You don't want to get out of the body. You don't want to resign from life. You love life. You say yes to it, even if it repeats itself endlessly. This myth, however, I think proved to be one of the bitterest pills that Nietzsche came up with, one of the hardest things for any admirer of Nietzsche to swallow. I think I've finally come to understand it, but I still can't say I'm crazy about it. And I really, it's not a joke to suggest that Nietzsche could just as easily have picked a myth of the living earth to express his highest form of yea-saying, of yes, saying yes to life. And that if he had done so, given his brilliance and the deep and still hidden but ever more and more obvious impact of Nietzsche on modern life, that we would possibly find ourselves in a different situation now vis-a-vis technology and the problems of the visualization of the earth as dead matter, which we are all the unhappy inheritors of. It may seem odd to link the socialist Fourier with the individualist Nietzsche in defense of the living earth. But in truth, Fourier's social being would be a far more realized, indeed superhuman, individual than any poor cripples of civilization, while Nietzsche's supermen would find true fellowship in a society of free spirits. So because both Nietzsche and Fourier can be understood within the context of anarchism, I think that they are compatible. The social individual dichotomy, the conflict between the desires and purposes of the individual and the desires and purposes of society, this has been exaggerated by one-sided 19th century political ideologues with various kinds of axes to grind and elections to win. The truth is that both sides are true simultaneously, or so the theory of the living earth would seem to suggest. Each of us is a part of nature, true, but our value as individuals is not thereby lessened in any way, since it would be equally true to say that nature is part of us, each of us, individually. Nature's freedom from all abstract categorical imperatives does not reduce all biota, all living things, to a faceless mass. On the contrary, it restores to each thing its own true and unique face. Part 4. A tactic of reappearance. This begins with a quote from Walt Whitman in his poem A Song of the Rolling Earth. I swear the earth shall surely be complete to him or her who shall be complete. The earth remains jagged and broken only to him or her who remains jagged and broken. I swear there is no greatness or power that does not emulate those of the earth. There can be no theory of any account unless it corroborate the theory of the earth. No politics, song, religion, behavior, or whatnot is of account unless it compare with the amplitude of the earth, unless it face the exactness, vitality, impartiality, rectitude of the earth. Say on, sayers, sing on, singers, delve, mold, pile the words of the earth. Work on, age after age, nothing is to be lost. It may have to wait long, but it will certainly come in use. When the materials are all prepared and ready, the architects shall appear. Walt Whitman. By the way, influenced by Fourier. In a book which I wrote, but don't publicly admit to having written, called The Temporary Autonomous Zone, I suggested that disappearance, meaning the drift-like avoidance of all categories, could be considered a tactic for radical liberatory action. Here, in counterbalance, I would like to suggest that there may also exist tactics of reappearance. Disappearance, reappearance. In these terms, revolution in both the Marxist and Bakuninist branches of the social movement would be a tactic of appearance. Simply, the revolution appears and history is changed. However, the revolution has in fact not appeared, and it may never appear. First, because it is outgunned, And second, because if it could outgun the state, it would face the danger of taking its place, which is what happened in the Soviet Union. In this situation, the will to power as disappearance, that is to say, vanishment from direct confrontation with the state and even from history, suggests itself as a logical next step in the dialectic of the social, especially since the social itself has been said with some justification to have disappeared. In terms of the situationists, is everybody familiar with situationist thinking, at least to some extent? Anyone never heard of situationism? I'm sorry, I don't think I can add a half an hour I'll talk to you later. In the terms of situationism, everyday life is the last site of the struggle for the social. But everyday life is precisely that which recedes and even vanishes in the face of the spectacle, or, in Jean Baudrillard's phrase, the obscenity of simulation. Nature, according to this line of thinking, disappeared some time ago. Probably, as I say in a footnote, at the precise moment when some anonymous 18th century savant first thought to improve his leisure by going to admire some mountain or beach for its grandeur and picturesqueness. That was the moment that nature disappeared forever. The idea of a living earth disappeared in even yet more remote times. To speak of a revival of Hermeticism, therefore, is either an exercise in rank and futile nostalgism, or else it must be called a tactic of reappearance. And in fact, why should nothing ever come back again? On the contrary, everything recurs. Lovelock points out that spaceflight and the first photographs of the whole Earth taken from orbit supplied the occasion for the recurrence of the idea of Gaia. He says it was first proposed by the Scots geologist James Hutton in 1785, but was ignored by the Royal Society. I would guess it was ignored by the Royal Society because it sounded like natural magic. But of course, Hutton, this Scots geologist, had many predecessors and could have absorbed Hermetic ideas, possibly through Freemasonry, or could have learned from Celtic monks or Roman Stoics or Renaissance Neoplatonists. It's ridiculous for Lovelock, for whom, hats off and everything, but it's ridiculous for him to say that the idea of Gaia appeared in 1785. It's one of the very old, it appeared, if you like, with Hesiod, who spoke of Gaia as chaos, Eros, and Gaia as the first three divine principles. Of course, none of these ancient thinkers entirely overcame that Gnostic trace of dualism, but each in their own way defended the earth as sacred, rather than defamed it as the sinkhole of the cosmos, the garbage pit of the seven spheres, and the antechamber to hell. The rights of a sacred earth. What is my footnote on that? Anyway, the rights of a sacred earth, as opposed to the cause of some spook who excludes mere matter as profane, reappear over and over again from the moment of disappearance of the Paleolithic to the Anabaptist rebellions of the 16th and 17th centuries. Indeed, the last showdown between natural magic and Newtonianism took place only about a century before 1785, and the fallout was still in the air. And, as noted above, Hermeticism was not dead, but only disappeared into the underground or the countercultural abyss. The myth of the living earth cannot die because, like all true myths, it relates to and arises directly from the body. It is, in fact, the myth of the body. In Hesiod, the Greek writer that I referred to, the first gods are chaos, eros, earth, and night, the principles of the body, if you stop to think about it. Even earlier, in both Babylonian and Chinese myth, chaos, called Tiamat in Babylonia or Huntun in China, is the body of earth. These myths deserve to return, not only because they would provide imagery for the popularization of chaos science or Prigoghine's theories or Ralph Abraham's work on complex dynamical systems, but also because they represent a social stratum rooted in the Paleolithic, which is primal, material, ludic, festal, oriented to the gift not the commodity, gender egalitarian, based on excess, not scarcity, lacking any structure which could be called the state, polymorphous erotic, aesthetic, and magical. Let me read that list for you again. These myths represent a social stratum rooted in the Paleolithic, which is primal, material, ludic, that is to say playful, festal, celebratory, oriented to the gift, not the commodity, gender egalitarian, based on excess, not scarcity, lacking any structure which could be called the state, polymorphous erotic, aesthetic, and magical. In this sense, we can speak of a tactic of reappearance rather than a mere sentimental evocation of some lost and probably spurious totality. And on this point, a nice quotation from Thomas Frick in a book called The Sacred Theory of the Earth. He said, "Every enlightenment proceeds by virtue of a blinding vision that, though illuminating all in a certain direction, also casts profound shadows, precisely in the areas not visible from that particular vantage point. It might now well be time to return to a geocentric cosmology, yet with new awareness of the difficulties and responsibilities of such a viewpoint. What is imperative is that, as individuals, we become more conscious of the uniqueness of our metaphysical position in time and space, and of the infoldedness of our consciousness, however individual, with that which gives rise to it. We are concerned with integrating local vision and cosmic location without falling into the somnolence of imagining that our limited conception of the whole earth constitutes a new enlightenment. Theodor Adorno's inversion of Hegel, the whole is the false, should serve as a reminder until garlands adorn the tended paths of paradise." In other words, even as I'm proposing neo-Hermeticism as a revival, just as Frick proposes a sacred theory of the earth, and I'm warning along with him not to take this as a new totality, but for once let's begin with a Taoist dialectic point of view and seeing both sides to everything, and still making our choice for action. To some degree, this project involves the revival and rectification of a magical propaganda proposed by the Hermetic utopianists. Most humans spend most waking hours in a kind of low-grade semi-hypnosis, exacerbated by the spectacle to the point of automatism. In this state, they are susceptible to suggestion, to manipulation through imagery. In this sense, as Culiano points out, modern mass psychologists and advertisers already practice a magical propaganda, but for purposes of control rather than liberation. But the topos, the topic, the theme of the living earth belongs to a mythology of awakening rather than of soporific dullness. It is, as Nietzsche might have said, a myth of daybreak. As a potent image of life, it successfully bypasses the filter of linguistic abstraction and its map territory ideology. Not to deepen hypnosis, and hence the mechanisms of control, but to plant a seed of wakefulness. Science, wait a minute, sorry. Yeah, okay. Science, especially mechanistic classical science, and religion, especially supernaturalist authoritarian religion, are still fighting their tired old battles for control of the world, a cheap wrestling match which has long since ceased to interest any but the most deeply hypnotized marks. The world of this discourse is long overdue for a new synthesis, one which would make use of science without its world-destroying Prometheanism, and of religion without its world-denying Sisyphism, myth of Sisyphus, which are but the two sides of the post-Cartesian coin. The constant and so far rather unconvincing recent attempts to reconcile non-classical science with archaic or Oriental wisdom, I'm thinking of Fritjof Capra and people like that, bear witness to a genuine desire. Slowly, something begins to emerge, or rather to re-emerge, The spiral of intellectual history brings it round again, but makes it new, rectifies it, adorns it with brand new scientific facts and hypotheses, perfumes it with a flavor of new theology. The partisans of the living earth have a clear course of action already laid out for them. The image has already taken root in both religious and scientific thought, and it provides a bridge between the two opposites, science and religion. The obvious areas of attack, or rather of seduction and penetration, include the radical philosophy and history of science, ecological activism, the emergence of green or goddess theology within the monotheist religions, the entire Gaian movement, of course, the growing non-authoritarian autonomist anti-political movement, the new post-colonialist ethnography and the indigenous peoples movement, the micro-nationalist or bioregionalist movement, the embattled remnants of the various sexual freedom tendencies, repentant socialists newly converted to an ethic of freedom, repentant capitalists who suddenly see the advantages of socialism now that it's too late, aging hippies, young peace punks, neo-pagans, etc., etc. While none of these areas, tendencies, groups can assume a lone position of power, they are all capable of uniting at least on the tactical level under the symbolic banner of the living earth. This image could be the crystal which precipitates a reign of resistance and reconstruction, resistance to the masters of dead matter and the body of oppression, reconstruction of Blake's green and merry land right here in Albion or Turtle Island or wherever we live our everyday life. And what of the reality that banner would stand for? It would consist of the interpenetration and mutual seduction of everyday life and the wilderness. The interpenetration and mutual seduction of everyday life and the wilderness. Anarchists know that every flag, even the black flag of anarchy, needs to be burned once in a while, lest even the best idea, that of freedom, become in its turn a spook or shibboleth. But in the moment of insurrection, which is like a moment of intoxication, it becomes permissible to worship a symbol because one already stands in the presence of the reality it represents. Therefore, next to the black escutcheon of chaos and night, raise the green pennant of Eros and earth, and venture forth like surrealist knights to do beautiful and absurd deeds of chivalry. Chaos never died. The earth is alive. Thank you. Thank you. How are we doing for time? Oh, good. All right. Well, we have a little time for questions if there are any, or comments. Yeah.
Well, let me play the role of that lever to get to the center of this problem.
The role of
Back in the smoke-filled back room late at night, discussing with me. They tell me, maybe, let's forget about the ideology. Let's say that, for example, Drill produced this crazy notion in 1930 that arithmetic is mathematics is strange. That we have to do this as an agnostic. But he invented recursion theory. Recursion theory gave us computers. Behind the great force of science is their claim to predictability.
Yeah.
How would a new Hermetic science deal with this science?
Yeah. Well, probably the most famous story about this is the steam engine. It was designed by someone whose entire understanding of classical physics was wrong. But, he tinkered around and it worked, as you say, out of Gödel's proof that mathematics cannot contain the proof of its own provability came the computer, for good or bad, whatever. I don't know how a revived Hermetic science can deal with such a chancy situation, What I'm saying is that you Well, all right, let me tell you a story about Mullah Nasruddin, you know, the famous Sufi fool. It seems that he was coming home late one night, perhaps a bit tipsy, and he lost his keys somewhere. So he goes home and finds a friend, and he says, "Come help me look for my keys." So they go back out on the road, and there's a street light, and they're looking around under the street light. They're looking around under the street light, and they're looking around under the street light. They can't find the keys. So finally the friend says, "Mullah, are you sure you dropped your keys here under the street light?" He says, "Well, no, I'm not sure, but it's the only place where we can look." So I think that's the answer to your question. You look in certain illuminated areas or areas that you think might be illuminated. So I was suggesting that if someone wanted to work on a revival of of Hermetic science, that they should look in those areas which are considered soft or even unscientific by the hard-nosed, classicists, but which in fact are showing some hard results. Alternative forms of medicine being one. So I don't know, I think it's dangerous to say, let's forget the ideology of science. It's an obvious, very obvious and expectable reaction to the confusion, to the madness and weirdness of quantum and chaos. It's like, okay, screw the wilderness, we're just doing science, man. And there's a tendency in the scientific community to abdicate ethics. I'm not talking about morality. I'm not talking about ideology. I'm not talking about categorical imperatives. I'm talking about ethics, which can be a completely situational, relativistic, perspectivalist, in Nietzsche's term, affair. You can not believe in God. You can not believe in Kant's categorical imperatives. You can not believe in ideologies, but you can still have an ethics, right?
What concerns me, frightens me really, is that in order to have this Hermetic science, really give it even break, even any possibility, is that yes, there is no ethical consideration, but the reason works this way. If it works, sure, who cares why it works? But if it works, then maybe why it works is true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe.
You have a Hermetic science going, even at the margin, head to head, competing because it is a power struggle.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Aren't you playing their game then by even admitting the criteria?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, so I'm saying, we're taking a risk. Let's take a risk. That's about the best I can say. JP.
One domain in which that's occurring is that biology is replacing physics with a paradigmatic worldview, and that a lot of people are trying to think in terms of ethics arising out of biology. Ideas of interdependence are as important as competition and so on. So in a way, it's already occurring, and just a choice of which science one looks to as a model.
Yeah. Yeah. As I say, I think this is already happening. It would be a matter of historians and philosophers of science coming along and saying, "Oh, look, this is already happening. This is interesting because this recapitulates certain Hermetic ideas from the 17th century and earlier," and making a big deal out of that, making it and thereby redirecting that energy in a slightly different and more interesting way. You see what I'm saying? It's a very vague concept, but.
In fact, the Eastern religions too, and that a lot of the intellectual elite, even in the West, has become very interested in the last 30 years in Eastern disciplines, and many Eastern philosophies are permeated by vitalism, and so it's not just the Western. Yeah.
Yeah, well, right. The whole point of this essay is to try to find some way to avoid that vitalist thing, or at least to say that if you want to be a vitalist, fine, be a vitalist, but here's an explanation that works without vitalism. That's why I find Prigogine so completely all-important, and chaos. The whole idea that comes out of chaos science of the strange attractor, which is something which is real but non-material. A pattern that exists somehow in the vortices of nature. No one has explained this yet. They've only been observed. And they haven't even really been observed. They've only been intuited mathematically. But to be able to say that it's something like that which draws material into a state of negentropy, of negative entropy, Otherwise, everything would obey the second law of thermodynamics, and the whole universe there would have been a big bang, and it would be all downhill from there. Why do we have local pockets of negative entropy? You either have to have recourse to vitalism to explain that. Well, God said, "Let there be light," or you've got your random mutation. If the soup is stirred long enough, then some amoeba pops out, which is totally ridiculous. Or
I didn't mean vitalism necessarily in that sense, in a cosmic sense, but vitalism in the sense of feeling it all matters alive, things like
yeah, I would say, right, exactly, and I would say that not all Oriental philosophy depends on a teleology in the Western sense of the word. If you look at Taoism, again, would be a very good example. Kuo Xiang said that everything behaves as if there were a true Lord that created them, but if you search, you will not find such a Lord. And what does this mean? It means that the Tao, the Tao dows, the Tao does it. And there is no Lord, there is no Creator, there is no God, there is no categorical imperative to make the Tao, so that the Tao which can be Taoed is not the Tao, he who speaks does not know. So even within Oriental philosophy, you can find ways to evade the idea of a creator God or of a purpose of the universe or a purpose of human life or all these kind of really very narrow concepts that have come into Western philosophy through in my opinion, a misunderstanding of monotheistic metaphysics, but that's another point. So, yeah.
One thing I understand being suggested by certain Native Americans in this issue is that in America we have a real opportunity in the sense of a big place in the green area, although the cities are trying to seriously get. The suggestion is that we could take with us, so to speak, the advantages of science or medicine or the successful aspects of it, and by going to this physics, by living in this open space, which they say exists, that we could in fact have the best of both. We could bring with us as beneficial culture, electronics, medicine, things that are real, I say, because I personally don't want to live that over. There are some benefits. We don't have to sacrifice.
That's what I said. I said that in the paper.
Going to the situation is that we could go physically away from the city and have it.
Well, yeah, but this philosophy is all too easily boiled down into the sort of greenbelt solution. The kind of a palliative utopianism that, in fact, a lot of the ideas of the utopianists were brought into the thinking of modernism, and a lot of the world that we're living in now is a kind of utopia gone sour. And one of the aspects of that which went really bad, this idea of the green belt, which became the suburb, and yeah, well, I don't. I personally don't. I mean, as I said, as far as I'm concerned, if you want a wilderness, we're much closer to it than the folks in rural Wisconsin. New York is more of a wilderness than rural Wisconsin. Now, I suppose the Amazon is more of a wilderness than either. The deep Amazon jungle.
This city is actually destroying the world. And we could, by relieving the pressure.
I don't think it's the city. What city is destroying the world?
Well, they say that the cities, quote unquote, destroying it by their very purpose. That was his problem. You can see that was the engine. That was what did the Crusades. It's what did the exploration. These people came, like London, came from the enclosure movement. They were driven to the cities, and thus they were given out throughout the world to trash the native environment.
Yeah. Right. Well, I don't know. This is a kind of endless argument that goes on also in anarchist circles, between the so-called primitivists and the so-called futurists. You got your people like Fifth Estate and John Zerzan and these folks whom I love dearly, who talk about basically back to the woods, get rid of cities, get rid of cars, even get rid of all technology. Some of them. Okay. on the other side, you've got your, Robert Anton Wilson and Timothy Leary and the Mondo 2000 type of people who talk about spaceships and orbital satellites and let's get off Earth and go to a new planet. That technology is the solution. We just need more of it. And I love them too. I find their ideas very interesting too. They're my friends as well. And I was never able to resolve this contradiction in my own mind. Finally, I decided that it was another false dichotomy. That basically, this question that you're asking can only be answered by what I call the politics of desire. That is to say, it's a question of what people truly want, not what they're told that they want by advertisers or politicians or social controllers or designers of suburbs and green belts, whatever. It's a question of what people truly desire. And in the event of, the revolution or whatever it is you want to call it, that turnaround of the social that we still, in a sense, hope for and expect, despite all the disappointments of history, in the event of such an uprising, let's call it, the politics of desire would decide whether there would be cities or not cities, whether there would be meat or not meat, whether there would be medicine or not medicine, whether there would be language or not language. These things are not something that can be decided ahead of time on the basis of ideology. They're something that have to be decided on the basis of what Fourier called passional attraction, right? So in the end, I think the quarrel between the Greens and the Metallicoids or whatever you want to call them is a false quarrel. They're both right and they're both wrong. And I would certainly, myself, I would hate to be caught making a statement like the cities have caused all the problems. I mean, it's simplistic, excuse me, but it's an oversimplification. The cities are at best a symptom of something wrong. They're not the cause, in my feeling. Yeah.
I'm thinking about a lot of things. I'm very pleased by a lot of which said, well, not all of it, but just one piece.
God forbid you should be pleased by all of it.
And I especially like the idea of the dialectic. You're making this proposal, but you know that it's not everything. You know that other things are going to creep into it. A couple of years ago, I picked up a brief history of time.
Hawking.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Since I was 6 years old, I've been reading in Reader's Digest about crippled kids and how they overcome everything. So, this is logical. I've always had a fascination for that stuff. And I've always been terrible in science. Just any kind of science. I could memorize biology. Biology was facts. I hated the labs, and I was terrible at the worst subject. And yet I'm pretty good in math, as long as it's theoretical. And that's what people would say. How could you be good in math but not in physics? But here I am. And I started reading Hawkins, and I found some things in it that were weird, and some things that I couldn't understand, and some things that I thought were errors. But there were two things that fascinated me. One was this thing about the sum of history, all these alternate timelines. And that's real interesting in terms of what you said about Newton actually pulling together a lot of other things and then slipping in a little bit of Hermeticism. And I always knew about the fact that, he had written occult papers that were hidden. I had no idea that it was published.
Oh yes, they've been published, yeah.
But the thing about Feynman here is this brilliant physicist, and yet if you go to any college bookstore nowadays, he's writing other kinds of books, including his desire to journey to Cuba, which is this remote part of Central Asia, and he never made it, but he and his friends did later on.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So there's something very spiritual in all his work. And the other thing is about Hawkins himself, that Hawkins is this very, very scientific mind, and yet he keeps saying, well, what if the finite without boundaries hypothesis of the universe is true? Well, the Earth, of course, is finite and boundaries. The surface of the Earth. Take it as a two-dimensional surface. It's finite without boundary. And Hawkins says, well, if the whole universe is like this, then what about the existence of a creator? There wouldn't be a creator. The universe just always was, always is, and always would be, always will be if that hypothesis is true. And I said to myself, that reminds me of an old Jewish prayer that I remember from when I was a kid. They say in synagogue, he was, he is, and he ever will be. That's some hymn that you sing at the end of the High Holy Day services, right? And I said, whoa, here Hawkins being so anti-spiritual, and he comes up with one of the most spiritual lines in modern
Well,
history.
all right, can I interrupt you? Hawkins has also fascinated me for the same reason. He's completely debunks any interest in Oriental mysticism as having any relevance to physics, and yet he's constantly pulling in these what to me look like disguised monotheist ideas. I mean, I suspect the guy of being a closet Christian, actually. And no, I'm serious. Hawking talks about the end of physics. He talks about the fact that, and he expects this to happen within his own lifetime, that the grand unified theory will be developed and that there will be nothing left to say in physics. This, to me, is an idea that could only have been dreamed up by some demented Jesuit. I mean, I really, I hate to criticize the guy at all because he is a hero. He is a hero to do what he's done, to be who he is, and to do what he's done. Fabulous, and fascinating. But this idea that he has terrifies me. I find the idea of the end of knowledge to be terrifying. If there's a saying in Islam that the Prophet said that God is veiled by 70,000 veils of light and darkness, and that this is in fact a blessing, because if we could see his face, we would be utterly burned and consumed. Now, the end of scientific knowledge to me would imply the lifting of those 70,000 veils, and it would imply the burning down of the world. If we really did come to the end of knowledge, we would all die either of cataclysm or boredom. Either that knowledge would come in the form of an explosion or implosion of the very fabric of reality, or we would all die of boredom. And I really hold it against Hawking that he's popularized this idea. I find it creepy. Yeah.
In your first lecture, also the last lecture, you talked about, linking up Nietzsche's idea of illusion. It seems to me that America, the illusion that the founding fathers put forth was exactly liberty. And in the first lecture, you explained that this...
Thank you. Yes, you're bringing me back to my original theme. Yeah.
Sort of a wheel of liberty. In the end, when you sort of gave a catalog of what this myth implies, this Hermetic myth implies, everything seemed to revolve around liberty, which you've been talking about for the past 3 lectures. Now, in the quote, I think you said it was flood. You said that the magus, the true magus, is a servant of nature. A servant.
That was Pico, actually. Yeah.
That was Pico.
All right.
Okay, so are you suggesting that to me strikes me immediately as a paradox, a deep paradox. The whole, through Judeo-Christian idea of being a slave to God.
Mm-hmm.
Are you suggesting that we believe that this neo-Hermetic paradigm accepts the paradox? Brushing it aside?
Well, in the first place, I certainly am not suggesting anything like a literal return to 17th century ideas. I don't want to bomb myself back to the Stone Age or any other age. Where everything changes, everything moves. Not necessarily forward, but not necessarily backward either. So I'm not suggesting that any of these quotes are going to be enshrined on my temple, and that I'm going to fight battles and murder people in the names of these quotations, because I'm not. There's stuff in every one of the quotes that I found that I don't like personally, or that I don't think is useful to the project. In this particular case, however, I think you should think of it in this way. Remember what the surrealists said about the penetration of everyday life by the marvelous. A phrase which I've always liked, although I have disagreements with the surrealists as well. In this case, it's not a question that one would find oneself the servant of this marvelous, right? One would not be serving the marvelous that had penetrated everyday life. The idea of such a relation between oneself and the marvelous in this case just wouldn't arise. In effect, you might be serving it, but it would be serving you. You would be fighting for it. It would be fighting for you. You would be making love to it. It would be making love to you. I mean, it would be an immensely complex relation. And I think that even Pico, to do him credit, probably didn't mean that in any kind of monkish way. Yeah. I think that that he was. Of course, he was interested. They were all interested in power, and I'm not saying that I'm not interested in power. You know, it's power is a very dirty word, so we can use the word empowerment, which is, you know, okay. I'm interested in self-empowerment, man. You know, and I think that Pico was talking about something like that. You serve nature; it will serve you. You know, you be the sort of a representative of the marvelous in everyday life, and the marvelous will exalt you. It will give you power. I think that's what he meant, and that's certainly what I mean. And I'm not going to say that I'm not interested in that power. I am interested in that power. I'm not interested in power over other people. I'm not interested in power to impose taxes, you know. But I certainly am interested in power to stand up as a human animal, you know, as an animate animal, in freedom, you know, and knowledge. That power interests me a great deal, and I think that's the kind of power that could be, that could evolve from the project that I'm discussing. I'd be the first to admit that there are many, many dangers inherent in this project that I'm suggesting, and that's why I brought in that very nice quote from Frick, quoting Adorno, misquoting Hegel, about that the whole is the false. The totality is the false. Anything which presents itself as the totality is bad news, you know. Anything that presents itself as the categorical imperative is bad news, including my whole idea, you know. So, again, with the Taoist dialectics, you know, take it, spin it around, you know, make the colors sparkle, do whatever you can with it, but don't swallow it as ideology. I'm not proposing it as ideology, all right? Maybe Pico della Mirandola was taking it as ideology. I'm not. All right? And what if somebody did? Well, then I guess I'd have to denounce them from the pulpit or something. I don't know. No, I mean, there's no answer to that, you know. I mean, one does what one can. And if one is misunderstood, this is partly one's own fault. You know, one wasn't clear enough, perhaps. Anything else? Yeah.
Could you talk about Mr. Logan's and why he's so important to you about?
Why don't you speak to me afterwards? I think I've already dealt with that. Any other questions? Yeah.
I like the false dichotomy that one remark said the Neolithic forced the Paleolithic underground.
Yes.
This is the first underground we ever had.
That's right.
But as you've been speaking here, I've been seeing how you don't want us to lapse into that simple dichotomy between goddess, great goddess, and paternal God. That would just be another false dichotomy.
Yeah. I've often said that I'm no more interested in the rule of dad has not proved very salubrious, but I'm not interested in the rule of mom either. You know.
What was it particularly about the Neolithic that forced the Paleolithic underground?
Total mystery, man. I'm working on it, you know, and so are a lot of other. No, really, so are a lot of other people. It's a very deep mystery. Why, you know, after millions, literally millions of years of Paleolithic, why suddenly we get this scrim or smear of the Neolithic, which we're still in, basically, for the last 10,000 years. Why? Why did we agree to give up all that good and groovy life, you know?
Because that blinding light that you talk about when we discover your agriculture,
I think maybe it was aliens from UFOs, you know. What? Aliens from UFOs, right. Blinding, flashing lights. Come with us, you know. Just grow these potatoes and everything will be fine, you know. No, I don't know. I don't know what that's a mystery. That's the great mystery. And that's McKenna, right? Yeah. That's my friend Terence. Terence has an interesting theory that mushrooms cause consciousness and alcohol cause civilization, which is really, it's a nice paradigm, but it's a vast oversimplification. And it certainly doesn't take into account the Dionysian aspects of alcohol, and it doesn't take into account the fact that it was the CIA that introduced us to psychedelic drugs, and that we should be very careful where we're getting our visions from. You know, Terence is a wonderful optimist, and he has a very interesting theory of history, but on this particular point, way too oversimplified for my money. Yeah. The what?
The theory that every 25,000.
Oh, Velikovsky?
Meteors come and they blanket the earth, and there's
You're talking about Velikovsky.
I think so. Yeah. I've heard about Velikovsky's one name.
Yeah, Velikovsky does.
Iridium layers.
Oh, really? Yeah, right.
Is there?
Yeah, well, that's what Timothy Leary said about Cahutek. You know, he said, "Get ready to leave the earth. Cahutek is coming. We're all going to." Didn't happen. You know? And I don't think, frankly, I don't think Velikovsky. I think Velikovsky's been disproved. I mean, there's some interesting stuff maybe in there, a few interesting things in Velikovsky, but as an explanation of history, you know, these one sentence explanations of history, they don't satisfy me. They never do. You know. Exactly. Everything's from comets. Give me a break. You know. Huh? Yeah, well, you're right. Celestial signs in the sky, you know, and that may have been interpreted by modern people to mean meteors or planets or something. But celestial signs in the sky are not necessarily astrological. I mean, astronomical. They could be astrological too. You know.
The disappearance of species due to, being hit by a giant meteor and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, just was at the Museum of Natural History the other day, and they're still touting that dinosaurs died because meteors hit them. And it caused the iridium layer, and all the dinosaurs died out. And that's the only reason we're here. The change in the climate let mammals develop, otherwise they'd still be dinosaurs.
The dinosaurs were using too much underarm deodorant.
Yeah.
Was there a question over here? Did someone... Oh.
Or the belief of that will say it was next to your theory, whatever that argument that is. Is that the way you present it?
What do you mean? Am I agreeing with the American Indians, or are they agreeing with me? I'm agreeing with them. I don't think they're agreeing with me. They have certain blind spots too. I mean, as everyone does. And I'm not claiming to be the universal consciousness to... Well, yeah, I mean, the whole question for the American Indians, and it's one that came up over and over again in connection with this Columbus Day stuff, is it only the Indians who are the guardians of the wilderness, or can I be a guardian too? And if I can be a guardian too, does that mean that I should be initiated into their tradition? Does it mean I should do sweat lodges? And if that's so, does it mean that there should be $60 weekend sweat lodges at the Open Center? You know, it gets to be a very complicated problem, and 200, 300, 400 years of vicious racism and oppression and bad times and bad consciousness and bad faith all come into it. No matter when this discussion is raised or by whom, there is not one American who can carry on a conversation about this without that background hum, that 60-cycle hum, evil hum, you know, behind the conversation. And so, you know, I don't know. Yes, I agree with them, and I'd be too oversimplification to say that they don't agree with me. You know, if they read up on Hermetic theory and we talked about this, and they might say, yes, that's what we believe. You know, that's very close to what we believe. We could get together on this. You know, I haven't had that experience. I'd love to, but for reasons which we could talk about, Native Americans don't come to these lectures. Why is that? That's an interesting question. Yeah.
Your teaching at times is surrealist. I was just wondering how you ended up in the surrealist nights of the world, but not Sufi nights. Sufi stuff.
Well, because Sufism is an ambiguous an ambiguous subject inasmuch as there's an argument as to whether it should be connected with an orthodox organized religion or not, or partially, or some of the time, or all of the time, or not all the time, or not some of. It's, in other words, to use the word Sufi would raise questions about the status of Islam, about how Islam comes into all this. Now that's an interesting question in itself. Islam has taken a different view of the environment than Christianity. If you'll notice, Christianity right away begins to talk about heaven as a city, right? Augustine's city of God. You know, even in Revelations, it talks about the city of gold and jewels, the whole thing. The image of perfection for Christianity has always been geometric and square, you know. And this has not been true to the same extent for Islam. In the Quran, it says that the things of this earth, things of nature, are waymarks for those with discernment. And this has always been taken to mean, by most Muslims, to mean that God's the natural things, trees, springs, rocks, desert, camels, whatever, in the earth, natural things, including human beings, are symbols that through contemplation create a whole, what they call the second Quran. For Islam, nature is the second Quran. It's a divine revelation. So the relation of Islam to the environment has, of necessity, been different than the relation of Christianity. And according to my old boss, Sayyid Hossein Nass, that I worked for and studied with in Iran, this is why Islam did not develop modern technology and why the Christian world did. Right? This is always the question, why was it the Christian West that developed modern technology and not China, for example, where they got so far, so developed, as Joseph Needham pointed out? Why not Islam, which did so much, you know, even discovered the circulation of blood long before Harvey, et cetera, you know, which Nasser has given his life to, showing how advanced Islamic science was in this respect. Why didn't Islam develop modern technology with all its Promethean and destructive aspects? Why was it Christianity? The explanation may lie in this, the difference between the Bible and the Quran and its view of nature. It might be something as simple as that. But I didn't want to raise all those questions, you know. In fact, I probably shouldn't have even used the word surrealist, because that raises questions of Marxism and Breton selling out to the Communist Party and, you know, Stalin and all. So, you know, maybe I should have said Dada Nights. Thank you. Maybe I'll change that. It's a good idea. I should probably... So anyway, I think maybe we should wrap it up unless there's any more burning points. Come and see me. Yeah.
Can I ask you just real quickly?
Sure.
I'm not going to ask you to explain.